liberalization of the economy, the selling of huge chunks of the economy at rock bottom prices to new billionaire magnates who came to dominate the central economy of the country. If you want to get an idea of the scale of it, the sale of those goods, before I get to the scale of it, which in all of those countries required the most systematic corruption at the top levels of society in order to have the bids on contracts, in order to line your pockets. People remember Mubarak's I'm never going to leave speech. You know, I devoted 31 years of my life to the people of Egypt. Roughly calculated, 70 billion over 30 years, that's 2 billion a year. I would love to give up a year of my life for that kind of 2 billion a year. But in other words, what you have is formally liberalization, in actuality, a complete corrupt system in which the enrichment of a tiny minority across the whole region was the name of the game. Ben Ali, just so people have some idea, the Ben Ali family is estimated to be worth $9 billion. The foreign debt of Tunisia was $18 billion. That means that the amassment of wealth of this family is half the total foreign debt. Just to give you a scale, an idea of the scale of enrichment. Now, none of that enrichment could take place without the use of systematic repression throughout the country, so that the right, Egypt was under an emergency decree law since 1981. Tunisia had its own version. And the conditions for, there's a big transformation in all of those countries. Certainly in Egypt, the industrialization of chunks of the country, it's not true that the economy didn't grow. It's just the benefits of the growth were very unevenly distributed. You had quite a resilient economy, which meant that, in particular in Egypt, you had the emergence of extreme social and economic polarization, and at the same time, the development of a labor movement which began to flex its muscles from 2002, 2003 into 2008. Because you have to ask yourself, how is it in a state-controlled society of that kind, from repression to revolution? How on earth did that happen? And I think all of those factors, the anger of the police, the torture, the lack of democracy, all expressed themselves over the last few years. The Kifaya movement, which was Kifaya is a word that means enough. It's not a bad slogan that we should adopt in the U.S., given the nature of the political system here. Enough is enough, kind of. Okay? That emerged in the early in 2000. So, but I think that what's important here is to understand that there was simmering discontent throughout the society with a lack of organization and confidence to act, but that what Tunisia did is create a spark which has helped give confidence to people all over the Arab world. And the spark that began in Tunisia, I'll talk about in detail in Egypt, because, as I said, I was in Egypt when Ben Ali left office. And nobody, I repeat, nobody from the democracy movement, from the independent trade unions, from the socialist activists, from the liberal activists, nobody actually believed that Hosni Mubarak would go at that time. And that was the discussion. It created a huge feeling of pride, the return of a kind of pride amongst Arabs, that we could do this kind of stuff, we could get rid of these dictators, but nobody really believed it could happen. Now, two things are important to say at this stage. First is that the demonstration that sparked it off took place on January the 25th, and there should be a warning to dictators not to be stupid. And I already told you what I think of Mubarak's level of intellect. However, you should know that the 25th of January was known as Police Day. Now, imagine the arrogance and stupidity of a dictator who proclaims a holiday. You know, it's like Martin Luther King Day. It's on the same time. But we're going to call it Police Day. Really a slogan to rally the people behind you. Precisely the force that people hate the most, we're going to celebrate. Of course, Police Day for the last many years had become a point of focal point, for the unrest, for organizing of demonstrations and organizing protests. Now, when I say nobody believed that anything significant would happen, I should say that signs that something bigger than the usual protest on Police Day were there. Ben Ali applied to go through Sharm el-Sheikh. People now know these locations well. It's kind of nice. We don't have to explain it. Sharm el-Sheikh, well, I'm going to explain it. The fourth holiday, I think the fourth largest holiday resort point in the world in terms of the number of people. Is also where the Mubaraks have a substantial and rather lavish abode, one of their many abodes, one of their many houses. Ben Ali applied to go through Cairo. Now, the role of Egypt, outside of under rendition, you know, when the Americans want to torture somebody, but you don't want your hands dirty, so you get people to take them to Egypt, let the Egyptians torture them, and then you can claim, I didn't know that. Well, no, all that's been exposed. That's why they quickly flew to kind of suppress the papers that were being produced. I'll come back to that point. But one of the things Egypt also did was every time a dictator was overthrown over the last 30, 40 years, they'd all go through Egypt before they were reprocessed. You know, they get debriefed, reprocessed, and shipped out to Paris or God knows where. In the case of Ben Ali, the government refused entrance to Ben Ali. That is, Mubarak said, I don't think it's a good idea for this guy to come through Egypt because it could inflame sentence against me. From the 22nd to the 24th, or 21st to the 24th of January, 7 people in Egypt attempted, 3 successfully, to immolate themselves, to set themselves on fire, following the example of the young man in Tunisia. Now, I'm not saying that's what created the revolt on the 25th, but you could see that there was more of a response already from the decision of the government not to do anything, and the example that individuals thought that they could spark a revolt. I left Cairo, by the way, on the 24th of January. So, you know, the posters are not lying. I did come back 4 days later, but it's to give 5 days later. It's to give you an idea that I had to go there for family reasons, and my flight went back on the 24th, and I thought, okay, there'll be a demonstration. Everything changed. Now, how it changed is important to understand, because these are not the long historical processes, but the result of what people actually chose to do, and what masses of people chose to do together in order to get to a name. Protest at Tahrir, which people now know means liberation, people have an image of the square, had been common. In 2003, I was invited to address, I thought it was a great honor, and I showed up to a police. Anyway, it was an honor, but it had certain drawbacks, like 5,000 police circling in the square. I was asked to address the crowd, and I thought, this is really a good invitation, isn't it? How do I get myself out of this one? To get into Tahrir, you had to go through masses of police cordons because they just circled the square. The main concern of the regime being isolate the radicals, isolate the activists from the ordinary population. You don't want to infect them with ideas against the regime. So they circled the square. I didn't think, how are people going to get in? I thought, well, it's simple. It's called a metro, which is people come by subway, underground subway, and they come into the square and then fill out the square, and then the police try to arrest a few, and you know, they do things of that kind. This time, the demonstrations did not start in that traditional way. This time, because of Tunisia, there was a strong debate as to how to begin the process, and the idea was, because of Tunisia, we may get a bigger popular response to what we had in the past. And so, outside of systematic disinformation to the authorities, that is, we're meeting here, nope, we're meeting there, nope, we're meeting there, groups of people assembled in popular neighborhoods and marched to Tahrir, and they could tell the difference immediately in that people came out of their homes and marched with the usual suspects, if we can call them that, you know, the core of troublemakers. By the way, speaking of the core of troublemakers, it's statistically impossible in any other setting to have 8 black t-shirts. There's something fishy going on here today. So back to the usual suspects. Another good movie, by the way. The usual suspects were no longer the usual suspects. It became a popular movement in which people's own actions